สวัสดีทุกท่านนะคะขอต้อนรับกลับเข้าสู่ภาคบ่ายของกิจกรรม Rise Up Summit เมื่อโลกเปลี่ยนข้าวต้องปรับค่ะสำหรับบ่ายวันนี้นะคะเราได้รับเกียรติจากวิทยากรนะคะคุณชยาดาม่วงโสภานะคะจะมาเสวนาในหัวข้อเรื่องไม่เผาร่วมมือลด PM 2.5 ผ่านเกษตรกรรมยั่งยืนค่ะก็เพื่อไม่ให้เป็นการเสียเวลานะคะขอเรียนเชิญคุณชยาดาม่วงโสภาค่ะขอเสียงปรบมือต้อนรับด้วยค่ะ
ลองจินตนาการนะคะว่าประเทศไทยเรามีท้องฟ้าที่สดใสแล้วก็ผืนดินที่อุดมสมบูรณ์ทุกลมหายใจของเราผูกพันกับผืนดินทุกวันนี้ไร่นาเนี่ยค่ะถูกเผาแล้วก็อากาศของเราถูกทำลายแล้วก็นี่ไม่ใช่เพียงแค่หากเกษตรกรสามารถที่จะเปลี่ยนเศษวัสดุการเกษตรเช่นตอสั่งข้าวหรือฟางข้าวให้เป็นทรัพยากรที่มีค่าไม่ใช่เป็นเพียงมลพิษนะคะนั่นจะไม่ได้หมายถึงว่าเราเพียงแค่รณรงค์การหยุดเผาเท่านั้นแต่เรากำลังจะสร้างอนาคตที่ยั่งยืนให้กับเกษตรกรไทยสิ่งแวดล้อมและคุณภาพชีวิตที่ดีขึ้นสำหรับทุกคนโครงการไม่เผา99ได้รับความร่วมมือจากมูลนิธิชัยพัฒนามูลนิธิข้าวไทยแล้วก็เครือข่ายนวัตกรรมเกษตรระหว่างภูมิภาคซึ่งได้รับการสนับสนุนจากกระทรวงเกษตรแห่งรัฐบาลสหรัฐอเมริกาหรือเราเรียกชื่อย่อว่า USDA-funded และ Winrock International โครงการไม่เผา99เนี่ยค่ะเป็นจุดมุ่งหมายของโครงการก็คือเราส่งเสริมการลดการเผาด้วยนวัตกรรมจุลินทรีย์ย่อยสลายต่อสั่งข้าว3ประเด็นหลักๆสำหรับโครงการนี้ก็คือ1คือแปลงสาธิต9แห่งทั่วประเทศในโครงการในพื้นที่ของมูลนิธิชัยพัฒนาจะถูกจัดตั้งขึ้นเป็นศูนย์นวัตกรรมและศูนย์การเรียนรู้เกษตรที่ยั่งยืนจะมีการเทรนให้ความรู้แล้วก็อบรมเกษตรกรถึงศักยภาพของจุลินทรีย์ย่อยสลายต่อสั่งข้าวนี้ว่าทำงานอย่างรวดเร็วแล้วก็มีประสิทธิภาพอย่างไรอย่างที่2คือเราจะสร้างเครือข่ายเกษตรกรผู้นำที่ได้รับความรู้แล้วก็เป็นตัวอย่างให้กับชุมชนแล้วก็อย่างที่3ก็คือว่าเราจะส่งเสริมจุดจำหน่ายค้าปลีกนะคะแล้วก็กระจายสินค้ากระจายผลิตภัณฑ์ของนวัตกรรมจุลินทรีย์นี้ซึ่งมีหลากหลายยี่ห้อในประเทศไม่ว่าจะเป็นของภาครัฐจากกรมวิชาการเกษตรกรมการข้าวหรือว่ากรมพัฒนาที่ดินรวมทั้งของบริษัทเอกชนให้เกษตรกรสามารถเข้าถึงนวัตกรรมได้สะดวกยิ่งขึ้นจากเศษวัสดุการเกษตรกลายเป็นดินที่อุดมสมบูรณ์และไม่ใช่เพียงแค่การรณรงค์การหยุดเผาแต่ว่าคือการสร้างอนาคตให้เกษตรกรรมที่ยั่งยืนให้กับเกษตรแล้วก็สิ่งแวดล้อมแต่ว่านวัตกรรมจุลินทรีย์นี้ส่งเสริมการผลิตข้าวคาร์บอนต่ำแล้วก็ข้าวอินทรีย์ส่งเสริมดินให้อุดมสมบูรณ์ยิ่งขึ้นแล้วก็ลดการใช้ปุ๋ยเคมีรวมทั้ง PM 2.5 และการปล่อยแก๊สมีเทนวันนี้นะคะเราไทยเรนอยากจะขอเรียนเชิญทุกท่านร่วมเป็นส่วนหนึ่งในการที่ผลักดันนวัตกรรมให้สร้างดินดีลดการเผาเพิ่มรายได้ที่ยั่งยืนแล้วก็สร้างคุณภาพชีวิตที่ดีให้กับเกษตรกรเราอยากเชิญทุกท่านร่วมมือเข้ากับในโครงการไม่เผา99นี้ในการที่ผลักดันนวัตกรรมนี้ให้สู่ถึงเกษตรกรทั่วประเทศแล้วก็สร้างอนาคตเกษตรกรรมที่ยั่งยืนให้กับประเทศไทยจากนี้เดี๋ยวถ้ามีท่านไหนอยากจะรู้จักโครงการนี้มากขึ้นเชิญพบกับไทยเรนที่ใส่เสื้อตัวนี้มี2ท่านที่อยู่ในงานนี้ได้เลยค่ะก็ขอบคุณค่ะหลังจากนี้ขอเชิญคุณวินนะคะ Executive Director จาก Sustainable Rice Platform ขึ้นมาคุยถึงเรื่องข้าวไทยต่อค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
สวัสดีครับทุกท่านรู้สึกเป็นเกียรติอย่างยิ่งที่ได้มีโอกาสที่จะร่วมกับงานในวันนี้นะก็ต้องขอบคุณมูลนิธิข้าวไทยที่ได้ชวนมาผมอยู่เมืองไทยประมาณ39ปีนะครับแต่ยังไม่มีความมั่นใจเพียงพอที่จะบรรยายในภาษาไทยเพราะฉะนั้นจะขออนุญาตจะออกไปเป็นภาษาอังกฤษนะครับเมื่อเช้านี้เราได้ยินนโยบายของประเทศไทยที่เกี่ยวข้องกับข้าว แต่สิ่งที่ผมสังเกตว่ามันขาดคืออะไรคำว่า sustainability ความยั่งยืน I really believe that what we're missing in the policies that we heard described this morning is the word sustainability. Although elements of that are encompassed in the policies relating to reduction in emissions and other aspects too. But I do think that Thailand would benefit greatly from a very explicit mention and focus on sustainability at the heart of its rice policy. What I hope to do today is just to say a little bit about why that might be and how the ideas of sustainability as we have put together within the Sustainable Rice platform can contribute. Okay? So, we've heard some shock tactics used in UK recently. Rice farming produces more emissions than 1,200 coal plants, more than the global aviation industry, all of that. And it's created quite a lot of waves within the industry, of course. And we know that rice is both a contributor and a victim of climate change. Smallholder farmers, it's basically a poor man's crop, whether you're on the production or the consumption side. Smallholders earn very little, so there's very low tolerance of risk amongst right farmers. Massive use of resources such as fertilizers and water. And of course, as we heard this morning, rice contributes enormously to global methane emissions. Lastly, when rice production intrudes upon wetlands, you're losing quite a lot of biodiversity and of course threatened species that use those as habitats. So rice is really central to a lot of these elements that are touched upon within the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So I don't know what's happened to the contrast here. So I'll be talking about really what is the state of the problem, a little bit about SRP for those of you who are not familiar. We'll be talking a little bit about the market for sustainable rice, because that is kind of crucial. Without the market, there is no uptake. And then, of course, as we have developed some tools, which I will share with you, how do you upscale adoption of those tools amongst very fragmented farmers, many of whom have only half or 1 hectare, couple of rye. So it's a really major challenge to drive wide-scale adoption and make sustainable practices the norm. And then I'll say, just close off with some comments on what we are doing and what our plans are for the future. So I think all of you are very familiar with this. I'm not going to lecture a group of rice experts on the rice sector in Thailand, but I thought what was important here is to note that if you look on the right-hand side of the graph, of the picture here, you'll see just how much the ag sector contributes to total emissions in Thailand. It actually accounts for 50% of total agricultural emissions in the country, and that's a lot. And Thailand is in fact the world's 4th largest emitter of emissions from rice. I don't know whether we heard this morning, I'm not sure, I didn't pick it up, but Thailand has set a goal for reducing emissions by 26% below and by 30% to 40% below the business as usual baseline levels by 2030. So these are very ambitious targets, and it's not clear how the country aims to do that, neither in the energy or the transport sectors, but also in the agricultural sector. So the impacts of climate change are being felt as we speak by farmers in Thailand. Again, I don't know what's happened to the contrast on my slides. I apologize, it's not very clear. But rice farmers are really amongst the most vulnerable to climate change, from extreme weather, from fluctuations in rainfall patterns, droughts and floods, and also through rising temperatures. For every 1 degree rise in night temperatures over the season, rice yields, IRRI says rice yields falls by 10%. So that's a very major impact right there, just from temperature increase, and then you also have salinity, saline intrusion of rivers and so on. But there are many technologies that can be used to decarbonize rice, to reduce the impacts of climate change, and also to reduce the emissions of the sector itself. And what I wanted to show here, a bit of a complicated slide, but it's possible to reduce the carbon footprint of rice throughout the production cycle, from breeding, from crop genetics, to selection of good seed, to, of course, water management, where most mitigation efforts have focused. It's the low-hanging fruit, isn't it? To nutrient management, development of better fertilizers, slow-release fertilizers, better placement, and so on. And then, of course, as we heard, how do we address the question of burning and post-harvest, post-management? And there are a bunch of different solutions that are available to us. As we see here, SRP and others have focused generally on these, and I'm not going to go into those, but you can see there's an array of different ways that we can approach the problem. And these are proven technologies that we can implement tomorrow. The challenge is getting these technologies to farmers and to get their adoption in the market. We heard a little bit just now from Rain about burning. SRP very much is in alignment with, of course, the no burning agenda. The SRP standard prohibits burning. It's a mandatory threshold. If you burn your fields, you can't qualify. You can't pass the SRP standard. And there are quite a number of alternatives, and we heard an amazing example from Rain earlier on. So, to the SRP itself, we are a not-for-profit alliance. We work to improve working conditions for farmers, to offer tools to farmers that can help them move from their current practices to more sustainable methods at a low cost. And then, of course, to supplement that by working on the market side to provide a market for assured sustainable rice and use that as a demand driver. We have 115 members so far. All of them are companies, UN agencies, governmental bodies, research, and civil society. So we're quite kind of well distributed across the stakeholder spectrum. And that's very important in a sector where you have very diverse perspectives. And so our aim is to provide a forum to bring those perspectives together and build consensus and co-create some tools that are acceptable across the spectrum. And so we have two ways of working. We work, and this has been the most visible side, the market-led approach, where we work through value chains to connect producers to markets, mostly in developed countries. But we also work with the development sector, because SRP was set up with the UN Environment Programme and the International Rice Research Institute. Development is at the heart of our agenda. So considering that only 7 or 8% of global rice production is actually traded on the international market, if you want to change the sector, if you want to transform the sector, you really have to work in the countries of production which are essentially non-certificated. And that's a really important thing to remember. And that's why we are working with the multilateral agencies and with governments to drive projects in the producing countries. And I'll give an example of that later on in a few slides. So those two approaches synergize each other. Governments watch what happens in the private sector, and it de-risks policy interventions when governments can see things succeeding in the market. So this is our system of tools. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of different instruments there, centered around the SRP standard, which was released originally in 2015. It's currently in the third cycle of revision, and if anyone is interested in commenting on the standard, we are in a stage of public consultation. So you are able to go to the SRP website and enter your comments, and then we will consider them and see how we can improve and incorporate those comments in the final version 3 of the standard. So complementing the standard, which is about practices, are a set of indicators. So once you adopt the SRP standard, how do you measure its impact? So the indicators offer a framework to guide practitioners and partners and academics, researchers, into assessing the impact, the sustainability footprint of any particular rice production. So all the rest of the tools that you see there are built around the standard and the indicators to allow us a governance system that gives credibility to a sustainability claim. The latest efforts that we are working on now is a low carbon module, which will be launched next year, which will allow value chain actors to make a verifiable mitigation claim of their scope 3 emissions within their own value chain. I'm going to skip through that. What is really important, I think, and I'm very proud of this, is that we helped Margaret Archer, the National Bureau of Agriculture and Food Commodity Standards, to develop and benchmark and release a Thai agricultural standard on sustainable rice. This was gazetted in 2022, and we are in discussion with Margaret Archer right now about how we can work together to promote sustainable rice as the prevailing practice amongst rice farmers in Thailand. A standard is great, but it sits on the shelf until you start using it and investing in it and using it to leverage incentives that are available from TOGOSR and other organizations. So we think that this provides a basis for various organizations to drive non-certificated, perhaps, sustainable rice production among rice farmers. So, okay, what are the benefits? If you adopt the SRP standard, well, what can it do? Our members did their own studies in 2017, 2018, and what was really interesting is across different production contexts. So this is dry land, this is irrigated rice, temperate and tropical. We were seeing reductions in water use, reductions in chemical use, and these were translating actually into savings in input costs and improvements in net farm incomes. And that's really important. If you do not have premiums, if you cannot give farmers a premium, the next best thing is to offer them savings in their input costs. And because the farmers themselves are in control of the amounts of inputs that they use, then this is a very important and stable and reliable kind of incentive for farmers. And because mainly of water management practices, greenhouse gas emissions are reduced as well. So a lot of different benefits available, and farmers will actually reduce their costs rather than increase their costs by adopting SRP. What is also important is that a lot of people think of SRP as a kind of, it's okay for export value chains, but it doesn't really help farmers producing for local markets. Well, as I've said, its benefits are actually market agnostic because, if you're reducing your fertilizer and pesticide inputs, it doesn't really matter where you're selling to. You're still saving money. You're still having more money in your pocket at the end of the season. And this is why we say SRP benefits can benefit farmers in the producing countries, whether or not they go for certification. So where are we now in the market? We launched the SRP assurance scheme in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, and yet we somehow managed to grow the market. And right now we have seen an expansion from basmati rice, mainly from India and Pakistan, which were really the market leaders for Europe, to an expansion to jasmine rice. And we've seen an uptick in interest from companies here in Thailand who've been approached by buyers wanting to purchase sustainable jasmine rice. There are some projects in the Northeast run by GIZ that are helping to facilitate these processes, and these form the basis of those export value chains. But what's interesting also is that we're going beyond jasmine to look at the lower value long grain rice as well. And so that stability, I think, gives us some confidence that the market is picking it up, it's broadening, it's becoming more mature. Some new developments then. As I mentioned, we are revising the standard, and I encourage you to look at the standard, contribute your comments, and be part of the solution. We have recently integrated our assurance program into a digital platform so that we're better able to manage data, and that's managed all within the Secretariat itself, which is here in Thailand. We are finalizing, in fact, we've just launched a digital chain of custody platform, which allows volumetric reconciliation throughout the supply chain. So you've got transparency, you've got clarity, and you've got compliance with EU regulations as well. We are working with IFC to allow exporters access to concessional finance where they are managing and exporting SRP products. As I mentioned, we are finalizing a low carbon assurance module and doing some work on carbon on financial instruments as well. On the low carbon assurance module, we're working with a number of different organizations, including Gold Standard as our knowledge partner, Mars as an off-taker and co-funder, and Regrow Ag, which is a global MRV partner, to help us calibrate emission factors for rice that will form the basis of these claims that can be made. It's currently being calibrated in India. We would like to extend that to Thailand. And again, if any of you are interested in being part of this pilot, please get in touch and let's talk. I mentioned upscaling, that we've had a number of different discussions with financial organizations and multilateral financing instruments, because really, unless you have engagement from the financial sector, you're not going to gain very much traction in transforming the global sector. So one of the projects, actually this is in Thailand, and it's being funded by the Global Environment Facility, managed by UNEP and GIZ, and SRP is a partner. We'll be training 45,000 farmers in SRP over this next 4 or 5 years, working with a number of different partners. Rice Department is key in all of this, of course, but the Ministry of Environment and Monterey is also very much involved, of course, in all of this. So that's a major scaling program which has SRP at its core. Now, the second and final example I want to share is we've heard a lot, I think, about blended finance instruments in agriculture emerging after the Paris Agreement as instruments to drive mitigation. We are working with FAO, again under Jeff financing, to put together blended finance facilities to manage financing gaps, to address financing gaps that small farmers face. And a really important one amongst these is pre-planting finance, where farmers have no money at the beginning of the season to purchase key inputs. They have no security. So how can you de-risk loans and services from financial institutions for this highly risky investment? So we're doing this in Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Ultimately, our aim is to establish a global sustainable rice fund under the Green Climate Fund of around $500 or $600 million. And that will help shape the flow of funds to actors, whether they be researchers or development people or practitioners, supply chain actors, to help drive, to help incentivize a transformation to sustainability. So the key message is then, well, in Thailand, back to Thailand, rice is a key contributor to Thailand's emissions, but also a key possible approach to addressing Thailand government's own commitments to NDCs, to nationally determined contributions, mitigation. So approaching the obligation, the national obligations through the rice sector is a really viable approach. The markets are export markets are really requiring much more focus on sustainability, and these are being mandated through things like the EU Green Deal. Here in Thailand, we are very fortunate, I think, amongst all the countries we're working with, Thailand is the first to set up a sustainable rice standard. And they offer frameworks that can really work for farmers to boost their livelihoods while fighting climate change and improving livelihoods. Lastly, then, global financing instruments can help drive transformation. And I will end again with this question: how can we work together, all of our organizations, to help drive a policy within the Thai government that makes sustainability, that places sustainability at the heart of what we all do? Very proud to see Thailand's exports improving and recovering and moving forward again. We are very excited to see this happen, and I'm sure we'll be back to number one very soon. I think that's it. Happy to answer any questions. ขอบคุณมากครับ